Enough for an anti-police brutality organization, and May 1st is our sort of 5-year anniversary of sorts. So we start this presentation out by just sort of taking a second of silence to remember people that have been killed by the Rochester Police Department over the years. So I'm just going to take maybe a minute here and just sort of scroll through some names and offer some silence. So in 2015, Barbara Lackwer and I started researching, along with the Coalition for Police Reform and members of Enough is Enough, this report, The Case for an Independent Police Accountability System, Transforming the Civilian Review Process in Rochester, New York. We looked at complaints by civilians there was aggregate data and annual reports from the professional standards section and the Civilian Review Board. We looked at the current processes for both. We talked to individuals who've been directly affected by police violence. We reviewed aggregate disciplinary information that we were able to find through PSS, professional standards section. And at the end, instead of having a one-page general recommendations, we actually wrote and developed an ordinance for passage by Rochester City Council. Let me go back. We looked at explicitly complaints of use of force that were civilian generated, right? So that's it. That's what our focus in our report was on. So this is Benny War. May 1st, 2013, Benny was out at the corner of Bartlett and Jefferson Avenue, enjoying a nice balmy night, May 1st. He was eating an ice cream cone. 3 officers came into the neighborhood and said to everybody, and there were about 15 to 20 people, get out of here. So Benny's seen the police, didn't want to have any issues. Benny is a disabled man. He was an amputee at birth. And so he uses a motorized wheelchair and a prosthetic to do carpentry. That was his life for about 25 years. So Benny wheels himself over to the bus stop because he's going to go meet a friend uptown. And the police come back around and see him there and get out of their cars and come over and tell him to get the fuck out of there. Excuse my French. And Benny says, "Sir, I'm waiting for the bus." And they said, "Get the fuck out of here now." And Benny again restates, "Sir, I'm waiting for the bus." At which point, Joseph Ferrigno pepper sprays Benny in the face. Officers Libertor and Ferrigno tip him out of his chair and proceed to beat and kick him. Officer Mitchell Stewart shows up later, and engages in that, but he's arrested. And to this day, Benny suffers from PTSD, chronic and increasing pain. The attack left the stump where his leg was amputated because of a deformity at birth, damaged and irreparable. So he's unable to use the prosthesis he had for 25 years doing hanging drywall and doing carpentry because of the attack. And May 1st, a week later, Enough is Enough came into existence, and Benny was sort of our inspiration. I know Benny's daughter through an unrelated high school friend, unrelated. I met her at his wedding. And she reached out to me a couple years later when this happened. And so Enough is Enough was born. And enough is enough. This stuff happens every day in Rochester and it needs to stop. It happens every day around the country. So what do? A couple things. We expose police brutality. We walk with people through the criminal and civil court processes. So we support people in court. We take their stories. We help share their stories if they want. We advocate with their lawyers. We'll find witnesses for their cases. We'll help them with technical details like getting still photography out of videos. Give them direct support like rides to lawyers, meetings, hearings in court, etc. The other thing we do is systemic. We try to use aggregate and testimonials from people in the community to demand systemic change of the current criminal justice system in Rochester. So as I said, in 2015, EIE started working with the Coalition for Police Reform to develop the report. And the Coalition for Police Reform is chaired by Reverend Lewis Stewart of United Christian Leadership Ministry, and at the time was co-chaired by Kaylin Rich of the New York Civil Liberties Union. And they had a 5-point community safety agenda, and one of those points was the creation of an independent police accountability board. And so Barbara Lockwood and I, as representatives from Enough is Enough, came to that subcommittee meeting and started working on that issue. So basically we're going to be talking about some key individuals. You got the civilian complainant, you've got the Rochester Police Department, and their professional standards section, which is the internal affairs of the department. You've got the Civilian Review Board, which is administered by a private nonprofit called the Center for Dispute Settlement. And that's under contract with the RPD since, City Council and the RPD since 1992. So the current process is this. You have experienced police violence, police misconduct. You can take your complaint and go to either the Center for Dispute Settlement or Professional Standards section and make a complaint. All of those intakes get shunted to Professional Standards section, where they invite you in to do an interview. I've sat in on about 5 of these interviews, and they really feel more like interrogations. They're trying to trip you up, put holes in your story, and make you feel like you don't know what you're talking about. Because that gives the police more credence to say it didn't happen, or what the officer did was right. That's my personal reflection on the matter. At that point, after they do this interview, the PSS does their own investigation, and they create an investigative package, they call it. And that package is then reviewed by PSS, and they make a recommendation and send it to the chief of police. They then send that recommendation and that investigative package over to the Civilian Review Board. And these are 3 folks who are chosen from a pool of people. They meet in the basement of City Hall, where 3 computers are set up, and they're set up by PSS, and the Civilian Review Board civilians review the complaint on those 3 computers. Now, the Civilian Review Board has no investigative authority. It cannot conduct its own investigation. It relies solely on the police for the investigation. The police do the only investigation. It also has no subpoena power, so it cannot subpoena for other evidence, other testimony, documentation, etc. It does not have that power. So really, it just takes the police investigation, looks at it in isolation from all the other cases, and then makes a recommendation. That recommendation is also sent to the chief of police. In our current process, the chief of police takes these 2 recommendations from PSS and from the Civilian Review Board and can, accept one or the other, accept neither, accept, if they both concur, accept both of them, or not even look at them. There's nothing in the current legislation from 1992 that says the chief has to do what either of these entities say, or that the chief has to explain why he's decided to do what he does. So the chief has final, full discretion, and there is no appeal process in this. There are 4 findings that both PSS and the Civilian Review Board can make. Exonerated, the officer did what the complainant said, and it was within policies and procedures. Sustained, meaning the officer did what the complainant said, but it was outside of policies and procedures. Unprovable, there wasn't enough information. And unfounded, they just think you're lying to them. We looked at sustain rates because we feel like that's one indicator. It's not a perfect indicator, but it's one indicator. And we looked at sustain rates over the course of 15 years. This is an older PowerPoint. We have data going up to 2016 now, which doesn't change these numbers at all. Anyways, from I believe it was 2001 to 2015, we had 1,173 allegations of force. So each complaint can have multiple allegations. So in one incident, one complaint, you can be kicked, you can be punched, you could be sworn at, there could be discourtesy. That would be like 4 allegations, right? So over 15 years, according to the PSS annual reports, there were 1,173 allegations of force generated by civilian complaints. Of those 1,173, the Civilian Review Board sustained 5%. Professional Standards Section sustained 3%, and the Chief of Police, who has final say over the process, sustained 2%. 90 miles on the road, there's a city called Syracuse, New York. Some of you may be aware of it. They actually have independent investigative authority, and they only investigate civilian-generated complaints. And their average over 4 years from when they were reconstituted in 2012, or 2013, is 26%. Now that doesn't mean that they have disciplinary power. They can compel the chief to make discipline over that 26% number, but the fact that they can actually investigate cases on their own shows that they have more latitude over what that process is and how it looks. And it shows that, you know, the Syracuse Police Department clearly has an issue. So the current board is not independent. Actually, in 2015, the city released a request for proposals, and the request for proposals was soliciting nonprofits to take on this role of running the Civilian Review Board, right? And it's interesting because if you read the RFP, the chief has a lot of power listed out in that RFP. Also, the RFP is really tailored for one organization to get that contract, that organization being the Center for Dispute Settlement. In 2015, the contact and the organization selecting the oversight body was Professional Standards Section of the Rochester Police Department. So we feel like this is an apparent conflict of interest. You don't have the hens choosing the fox that's going to guard their hen house. You know, that doesn't make any sense. But this is how it looks right now. In 2012 or 13, I think that was the previous art. It's like every 2 years. The city of Rochester City Council was the contact and the person that was selecting that. So there's something wrong with this process, clearly. It can investigate. It has no independent investigative power. It has no subpoena power. It has no disciplinary power. And, you know, this isn't good for the people of Rochester. So let's talk about discipline for a second. I said there were 1,173 allegations of use of force over 15 years, or 14 years of annual reports. Of those, 14 were actually, 14 of those 20, I'm backing up here. Of those 1,173 allegations, 23 were sustained. That's the 2% number that the chief sustained, right? 23 allegations. Of those 23 allegations, only 14 led to discipline. And of those 14 allegations that led to discipline, only 6, the harshest discipline was 6 suspensions. In-house discipline, in-house accountability is not working. It hasn't worked for 25 years. So we believe that this creates a loss of trust in the Rochester Police Department. It results in black and brown communities that are targeted by the police department to become, it leads to people being needlessly brutalized, targeted, harassed, imprisoned, killed, abuse of power by the police. We believe that this actually strips them of their own humanity because there's no accountability for their actions. Angry communities that refuse to work with the government, and lawsuits. We know that the city actually earmarks about $12 million a year for lawsuits across the gamut. And we know that the city pays out about over $1 million annually for like civil rights claims and excessive use of force. So there's a real financial stake there too. How are we doing on time? I'm gonna skip ahead. These are two cases, Brandon Carter and David Van, that we worked on. We use them to sort of give some gravitas to what I'm saying here, but we don't have a lot of time today, so I'm gonna keep going. So what do we propose? We're proposing what's called the Police Accountability Board. It's an 11-member board. You'd have 6 members nominated by the community and confirmed by City Council. 4 members would be appointed by Rochester City Council, and 1 would be appointed by the mayor's office. They all have to be Rochester residents, and they have to showcase the diversity of the city's population. This would be an agency independent of the Rochester Police Department. So it would have this volunteer 11-person board, and then it would have an executive director and investigators that would actually investigate the complaints against the police. These would be civilian investigators trained by civilian firms within New York State, or say the National Association for the Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, which is a national organization which also offers training on how to bring civilians up to speed and how to conduct investigations. There'd be a paid administrator, 11 boards of that. So the PAB would have its own power to independently investigate all these complaints. It would have subpoena power during that investigative process. It could then issue discipline. And finally, if the PAB feels that there are patterns and practices of abuse, it has the power to recommend and implement changes to police policy and procedure. This is a board with teeth. So how does it work? Basically, you have a complaint, and you can go to PSS, which, based on our information, doesn't seem like a worthwhile endeavor, or you can go directly to the Police Accountability Board. The board does an intake, maybe they do an interview, and then they do their own investigation on your behalf. That investigation will lead to the lead investigator or the executive director coming to the board and saying, here's my recommendation, here's what the case looks like. At that point, the board will vote, and assuming they accept, 3 members of that board are then tasked with finalizing the complaint. So those 3 members review the whole investigation. They, again, have subpoena power and independent investigative authority. So if they feel there's other elements they want to follow up on, they can. They're not hamstrung by like the current legislation. And at that point, they create a document with findings of fact and recommended discipline. Those findings of fact and recommended discipline are sent to the chief of police. PSS presumably sends their findings to the chief of police. You notice there's a laser missing. I never get to use this. You notice that. Oh, it doesn't work. Is it there? Oh, there it is. So this arrow right here, those intakes would be shared jointly between PSS and the PAB, so everyone sort of knows what's going on. But I just backed up needlessly. The PAB sends its recommended facts and findings and recommended discipline if it's sustained to the chief of police. The chief of police can then accept or decline to accept their findings and the recommended discipline. Our ordinance outlines that the chief then has to explain in writing why he disagrees. No more of this chief's discretion, I don't have to explain myself. He actually has to state why he disagrees with the board. At which point he sends it back to the board. The board can either agree or disagree with the chief's rationale. If the board doesn't agree with the chief's rationale, legally they would have the power to go back to the chief and say, impose a discipline. So they would have the power to compel the chief to do the discipline and to abide by the findings of fact that the board came up with. So in that process of determining findings of fact and recommended discipline, the board could use what we're recommending the board use, and the ordinance we're recommending this, what's called the disciplinary matrix. This is a schedule of progressive, consistent transparency of sanction for officers and their misconduct. I'm going to show you an example. This is not explicitly what we're asking for, but it is just an example. So if you look, I'm going to go back over here, sorry. This is penalty level 3, reduction in rank. And right here, you have using excessive force. If the officer has no sustained complaints against him, it's an 18 to 25-day suspension. If the officer has one prior sustained complaint, it's a reduction in rank, an 18 to 25-day suspension plus 5 days. A reduction in rank means reduction in pay and benefits. So it's not just in rank and name only, but it actually has a tangible economic consequence. Then if they have actually 2 prior sustained complaints, it's automatic dismissal. And the board would have the power to pass their investigation on to the Monroe County District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution of these officers, or to a special prosecutor in Albany through the New York State Attorney General's office. So this is just one, this is the mechanism we're proposing. This is not necessarily what will be the final, but just an idea of what we're talking about. So in the long run, we think this will improve trust between the police department and the community, because the community will finally have a stake in this process. The community will have power in this process. Currently, they don't have power or a stake. They're told that we should be having police-community relations, but that doesn't mean a whole lot in terms of what the police are actually willing to give up. We believe that it will create visibility and viability as Rochester is a progressive community that uplifts the integrity and humanity of its officers and civilians. Sorry, this is an older version, so I'm forced to go back and read some of this stuff. Reputation as a city will go up. We're foreseeing that there will be decreased lawsuits. Over 5 years of enough is enough, I have met so many people that said, if I just knew this officer was going to be off the force, I wouldn't sue the city at all. But there's no discipline, so people resort to lawsuits. That's their only mechanism of justice today. And finally, this is a cutting-edge model. We've seen this model, well, we've seen models like this that we're proposing with the powers we want passed as legislation in Oakland, California, and in Newark, New Jersey. So this is not pie in the sky. This is doable. It's possible. There's actually going to be an event coming up at the end of May where we're having people from Newark and Oakland come to Rochester and sort of talk about how they got to where they got and give us some inspiration that this is not just, a couple of radicals being radical. That's old. This is from last year. I'm sorry. And there's my contact information. So, I think that's about it. I can go infinitely into detail. If people have questions, I'd love to take them, and I'll stop there because I know it's 11 o'clock. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I can talk loud. We all know. How is the PAB chosen?
Is it on? Yeah, it's green.
Right up your mouth.
How is the PAB chosen?
So we're proposing a Police Accountability Board Alliance because we love long acronyms. This would be and actually we've got about, let me back up. There is a handout in the back table with bylaws we've come up with for this, but basically, at the end of 2017, we had nearly 90 organizations say they endorsed and supported our report and our ordinance. From that point to now, we've been asking those same organizations to confirm that they would actually be a part of the alliance. So that means signing a commitment form and sending 1 to 2 representatives to an alliance meeting. That alliance grouping, they select the 6 nominees. So they'll send a list of 6 to City Council, and then assuming there's no issues with the 6, Council confirms them and they're appointed. If there is an issue, the alliance would have 6 other names. They could then take the first one off the list, whatever, and send it to council and say, is this person good, is this person good? And they would have the power to switch out one or the other. So basically, the community gets it, and they, through this alliance, would have the option of nominating individuals. Other,
Yeah, so this sounds very reasonable, and I imagine that our city council, our mayor might be supportive of this. So I'm curious about what's the status, has this been proposed? Is it being, and are there any particular sticking points that on which there has been resistance from the people who can make this law?
Well, it's been pretty amazing. Like, we presented this to City Council in April of 2017, and everyone agreed we need a change, which was great to hear. We talked to the mayor about it in December of 2015, because it was just coming out, or December 2016, excuse me. So we presented it in April of 2017. Is that right? I'm sorry, my years are just...
It's a lot.
It's a lot to encompass. Anyways, the point being, though, that we've had ongoing and continuous conversation with President Scott of City Council, Adam McFadden, the Vice President. We met recently this year with the 2 of them, and Willie Joe Lightfoot, who's now the chairman of the Public Safety Committee. And we were also having individual conversations with city councilors, and none of them have been resistant necessarily to any of this. The sticking point, though, is, this is why you got to turn your phone off. And I wasn't here at the beginning, so I missed that announcement. So the one point of resistance, well, there's sort of 2 points. One point is discipline. The only, aside from, Jesus, sorry. So in the original report, we had suggested that the 6 members would be elected, and that got a huge ton of pushback from elected officials, from community groups. They didn't like this. The police union didn't like it. And so we said, all right, we'll do this police accountability board thing, and we'll change that. And so we did that, and we have like probably 50 organizations outside to do that. The second point was discipline. And there's been this sort of rumor throughout the years in City Council and City Hall that only the chief of police can discipline police officers. And this is governed by what we were told was Article 75 of the Civil Service Law. Now, you go and read civil service law, and it does not say that only the chief of police can discipline officers. It says an officer or a body can discipline officers. So our contention and our argument to City Council was, you're not even reading the law. Could you read the law? Because the law does not say the chief of police is the only person who can do that. And we were able to persuade them to the point where City Council has actually had to go outside of their own law department, who was also stating that, no, only the chief of police can do this. City Council has gone outside of the law department of the city to find an independent legal opinion to find out the legality of this. So that's good. It's also bad, because it could come against us, which means we need our own legal opinion, right? And that's the other half of this. Everybody's got to, have their legal opinion. I'm sorry. Am I over time?
Well, keep going.
Okay, all right.
Riveted. Keep going.
Sorry, so that's one piece, right? So it's just the discipline piece. And what President Scott told us at the beginning of this year was, until we determine the discipline piece, we can't figure out a structure, and we can't figure out who's going to be on it. So that's one piece. So once we get that piece figured out, that's great. Now we're moving forward again. The other aspect is the police union. And last fall, they brought this group called the Forsyth Institute to Rochester to basically train officers to shoot first and ask questions later. And they paid their director, Bill Lewinsky, to come to town and testify at trials if they happened to defend the officers' actions. So we put pressure on City Council because they had actually allocated $20,000 for this to train 10 officers. The union paid $95,000 to train like 80 officers. We're like, this is madness.